Farringdon Station, one of the oldest on the London Underground, hides beneath its ironwork and history a chilling legend that has unsettled passengers and staff for over a century. The haunting of the screaming spectre. The ghost is said to be that of Anne Naylor, a young orphan apprenticed to a cruel hat-maker in the mid-18th century, whose short life ended in shocking brutality. Abused and starved by her mistress Sarah Meteyard and Sarah's daughter, Anne's suffering grew unbearable until the day she was murdered. To conceal the crime, her body was hidden in a sewer near what would later become the site of Farringdon Station. Though her killers were eventually caught and executed, the horror of her death was so great that many believe her spirit never found peace. Since the 1860s, when the Metropolitan Railway first opened its tunnels, staff and commuters have spoken of hearing blood-curdling screams echoing through the platforms, sudden and piercing, then fading into silence with no source. Some describe the sound as that of a child or young girl, filled with pain and terror, rising from the very ground beneath their feet. Others have claimed to glimpse a pale, ragged figure in the shadows of the station, her mouth open in a silent scream, vanishing before she can be approached. The legend has earned Farringdon its reputation as one of the most haunted spots on the Underground, a place where history's violence continues to echo. Paranormal investigators who have braved the station at night report sudden chills, unexplained drafts, and the overwhelming feeling of sorrow pressing down on them in the tunnels. Unlike other London hauntings that inspire curiosity or melancholy, the screaming spectre is remembered for its raw terror, a visceral reminder of a child's suffering that refuses to fade. To this day, many workers refuse to be alone after hours at Farringdon, convinced that Anne Naylor's tormented spirit still screams for justice. Beneath the ceaseless roar of modern trains, Farringdon Station, one of the oldest stops on the London Underground, has carried with it a reputation for being haunted almost since the day it opened in the 1860s. Its most infamous legend is that of the screaming spectre, said to be the restless ghost of Anne Naylor, a young orphan girl who met a horrific fate long before the station was built. In the mid-18th century, Anne was apprenticed to Sarah Meteyard, a hatmaker, and Sarah's daughter. Far from being cared for, she was subjected to cruelty, neglect, and constant abuse. Eventually, the mistreatment turned deadly. Anne was murdered, her body hidden in a sewer that ran beneath the ground where Farringdon Station would later stand. Though the Meteyards were eventually caught and executed for the crime, the horror of Anne's death lingered, and her name became synonymous with the sorrow and brutality of forgotten Victorian London. When the Metropolitan Railway expanded into the area, workers and later passengers began to speak of strange and chilling sounds rising from the platforms and tunnels, eerie reminders of the child whose life had ended so violently. The reports that followed established the legend of the screaming spectre. Station staff and late-night travelers claimed to hear the unmistakable sound of a young girl's screams echoing suddenly in the stillness, piercing cries that rose to a peak and then faded into silence with no source to be found. Some described icy blasts rushing past them moments before the screaming began, while others insisted they saw the fleeting figure of a pale girl in ragged clothing, her mouth frozen in an expression of terror before vanishing into the shadows. Paranormal investigators who visited Farringdon noted unexplained cold spots, electrical malfunctions, and a heavy feeling of despair pressing down in certain tunnels. Unlike other underground hauntings, which often evoke curiosity or sympathy, Anne's ghostly presence inspires raw fear. For many, her screams are a reminder of cruelty and injustice, an echo that refuses to die even centuries later. To this day, staff admit unease about being alone at night in the station, convinced that the murdered child still calls out beneath the thunder of passing trains. Farringdon Station, one of London's earliest underground stations, hides a chilling legend beneath its busy modern facade. Known as the home of the screaming spectre, it is said to be haunted by the restless spirit of Anne Naylor, a young orphan who lived in 18th century London. Apprenticed to the cruel hatmaker Sarah Meteyard and her daughter, Anne suffered relentless abuse and neglect until, one day, she was murdered. Her body was hidden in a sewer that once ran beneath the ground where the station was eventually built. Although her killers were executed, the violence of her death created a lingering presence that many believe has never left. When the Metropolitan Railway opened in the 1860s, strange accounts began almost immediately. Workers and passengers spoke of hearing terrifying cries echoing through the tunnels, described as the desperate screams of a girl in agony. These shrieks erupted suddenly, fading as quickly as they appeared, leaving listeners shaken. Some described icy chills sweeping across the platform moments before the sounds began, while others insisted they saw a pale, ragged figure at the edge of their vision. dissolving before they could approach. The reports continued for decades, gaining strength as storytellers and journalists spread word of the screaming spectre. Paranormal investigators later brought equipment into the tunnels, only to encounter malfunctions, cold spots, and unexplained drafts. Witnesses reported feelings of despair pressing heavily on them in specific areas of the station. Unlike other underground hauntings, which sometimes evoke melancholy or curiosity, Farringdon's phantom inspires dread. The cries are not whispers of the past, but raw, visceral terror echoing into the present. Today, the legend endures as one of London's most disturbing ghost stories. Station staff admit reluctance to remain alone after hours, while ghost walks and tours recount Anne's tragic fate to curious visitors. Too many, her presence represents injustice left unresolved, a soul crying endlessly for release. Beneath the constant thunder of modern trains, the sorrow of a murdered child still lingers, ensuring that Farringdon Station remains a place where history and haunting meet in unforgettable fashion. Farringdon Station, one of the oldest on the London Underground, carries with it a legend that unsettles even the most seasoned travellers. The chilling tale of the screaming spectre, said to be the restless ghost of Anne Naylor, a young orphan girl who lived in 18th-century London. The story begins with tragedy. Anne had been apprenticed to a hatmaker, Sarah Meteyard, and her daughter, who subjected her to cruelty and neglect until her suffering ended in murder. Her body was hidden in a sewer near the site where Farringdon Station would later stand, and though her killers were eventually brought to justice, many believe her spirit never escaped the horror of her death. From the 1860s onward, staff and passengers began reporting terrifying experiences in the station. Sudden bursts of blood-curdling screams echoing across the tunnels, described as the desperate cries of a girl in agony, often accompanied by icy drafts and the sense of an unseen presence. Some claimed to glimpse a pale, ragged figure in the shadows, her mouth open in a silent scream, vanishing into the darkness as quickly as she appeared. Paranormal investigators who entered the station at night reported malfunctioning equipment, unexplainable cold spots, and the oppressive feeling of sorrow pressing down on them in certain passageways. Unlike other hauntings on the underground, which evoke curiosity or melancholy, Anne's lingering spirit inspires only fear. Her haunting is visceral, rooted in the memory of unimaginable cruelty. Modern commuters occasionally share similar accounts online, adding to the legend's persistence, while ghost walks and tours retell her tragic fate as part of London's folklore. Even today, some station staff avoid being alone late at night, convinced that the murdered child's anguish still echoes through the tunnels. Beneath the modern clatter of trains, the voice of injustice lingers, a spectral reminder that not all stories from London's past have been silenced. As the decades passed, Farringdon's ghost story refused to fade, its legend carried forward by countless witnesses who claimed to hear Anne Naylor's tortured cries. Unlike fleeting urban myths, the screaming spectre became deeply rooted in the folklore of the underground because of the consistency and intensity of the experiences reported. Many workers described the screams as so realistic and heart-wrenching that they instinctively searched for a living child in distress, only to find the station empty. One railway porter in the early 20th century swore that he followed the cries down a corridor, his lantern flickering as the sound grew louder, until he reached a dead end where the voice abruptly stopped. Shaken, he left his post that night and never returned to work alone. Passengers, too, recounted disturbing encounters, sudden cold gusts brushing against their skin in sealed areas, the feeling of invisible hands tugging at their clothing, or glimpses of a small figure hovering near the platform's edge before dissolving into mist. Paranormal researchers investigating in the mid-1900s claimed their instruments picked up unexplained energy spikes and low-frequency noises resembling distant wails, while skeptics have argued that the sounds could be caused by the acoustics of the tunnels or vibrations from passing trains. The sheer number of independent accounts lends the haunting and unsettling credibility. What separates Anne's ghost from other London spectres is the raw emotion attached to her presence, rather than provoking curiosity or even sympathy. Her manifestation often leaves witnesses shaken to their core, overwhelmed by dread and sorrow. To many, this haunting is not simply a spectral echo of history, but an enduring cry for justice from a child who suffered unspeakable cruelty. Even now, late-night staff admit to avoiding the quieter parts of Farringdon, where silence can be broken without warning by a piercing scream that sends chills through even the bravest hearts. By the latter half of the 20th century, the screaming spectre of Farringdon had become one of the best-known ghost stories in London, featured in newspapers, ghost walks, and eventually television documentaries. What fascinated audiences was not only the gruesome history of Anne Naylor's death, but the persistence of the reports across generations. Veteran station staff passed the tales down like warnings to new recruits, many of whom scoffed until they, too, heard the chilling screams or felt the icy air sweep across the platform. One night guard recounted being jolted awake during a break by a high-pitched shriek that seemed to come from directly behind him, though he was alone in a locked room. Another passenger, waiting for a late train, described watching a pale young girl in tattered clothes appear at the end of the platform, her mouth wide as if mid-scream, before vanishing in a blink. The emotional weight of these encounters was often worse than the visual shock. Witnesses spoke of a suffocating sense of despair that clung to them for hours afterward, as though Anne's suffering imprinted itself upon their minds. Ghost tours capitalized on the legend, bringing groups to Farringdon late at night to retell the story of the orphan girl whose agony was said to echo through the tunnels. Even paranormal investigators who approached with skepticism admitted that the location carried an oppressive atmosphere, one that was difficult to attribute solely to the station's age or architecture. For many, the haunting felt less like an occasional spectral appearance and more like a permanent stain on the space, as if the ground itself remembered the violence inflicted upon Anne. Unlike other underground hauntings, often softened by the passage of time, Farringdon's spectre remained raw, violent, and terrifying, an echo of injustice that refused to fade into legend, instead demanding attention from all who passed beneath the station's heavy iron girders. In modern times, the tale of Farringdon's screaming spectre has found new life through digital platforms, where commuters, tourists, and paranormal enthusiasts share their chilling experiences. Social media posts describe unsettling moments on quiet nights, passengers frozen in fear as piercing screams erupt across the tunnels, or guards insisting they saw the fleeting image of a young girl drifting in the shadows, only to vanish into the darkness. Videos uploaded online claim to capture unexplained anomalies, distorted sounds, sudden static, or faint cries in the background of routine station recordings. While skeptics dismiss these as tricks of acoustics or interference, believers argue that the consistency of such findings proves the haunting endures. Paranormal podcasts and YouTube investigators frequently feature Farringdon in their content, drawing international attention to the legend of Anne Naylor. Her tragic story is retold not only as a ghost tale but as a grim reminder of the cruelty inflicted on children during London's darker past. Tour guides lead ghost walks to the station, describing the horrific murder and the ghost said to remain, her cries piercing through time itself. Visitors often remark on the heavy, oppressive atmosphere, some reporting that they leave with headaches or an unexplained chill clinging to their skin. Unlike other London ghosts who inspire curiosity or even sympathy, Anne's spectre is remembered with dread, her presence steeped in pain and terror. Staff still acknowledge their unease, quietly admitting that after hours they avoid certain sections of the station known for sudden cold spots and echoes no train can explain. What makes the legend powerful is its refusal to fade centuries after Anne's death. Her voice is still said to ring out beneath the thunder of modern trains, ensuring her suffering is never forgotten. In this way, the screaming spectre has become both a haunting and a living memory, carried forward by every chilling retelling. As interest in Farringdon's screaming spectre grew, paranormal investigators began to view the station as a testing ground for theories about hauntings, trauma, and the persistence of memory. Teams equipped with electromagnetic detectors, thermal cameras, and digital recorders often reported phenomena that could not easily be explained. Cold spots would appear suddenly in sealed areas, cameras would malfunction just as screams were reported, and audio devices sometimes captured faint wails resembling a young girl crying for help. One group documented a series of rapid knocks on metal when they asked questions aloud, interpreting it as an attempt at communication. Skeptics countered that the noises were likely the result of vibrations from trains and pipes. Yet even they admitted the sheer intensity of eyewitness testimony gave the story unusual weight. Unlike folklore invented long after the fact, the screaming spectre has been reported consistently since the station's opening in the 1860s, suggesting a continuity difficult to dismiss. Folklorists argue that the story persists because it embodies themes of cruelty, injustice, and innocence portrayed lumens that strike deeply into the human imagination. Psychologists, meanwhile, propose that the haunting represents a cultural projection, the collective memory of Victorian child labor and exploitation manifesting as a restless ghost. Yet regardless of interpretation, The chilling reality for staff and passengers is that the screams remain unaccounted for. Some refuse to work night shifts at Farringdon while others carry protective charms, convinced they might shield them from the girl's anguish. Tourists drawn by ghost walks often leave visibly shaken, describing the station's atmosphere as heavy and oppressive, as though grief itself saturates the walls. Whether supernatural or psychological, the effect is undeniable. The legend of Anne Naylor lives on, her cries reverberating through time, demanding that her suffering never be ignored. By the dawn of the 21st century, the legend of the screaming spectre had become inseparable from the identity of Farringdon Station, ensuring its place among the most haunted sites in London. Journalists covering Halloween features often return to Anne Naylor's tragic story, weaving it into articles that highlight the darker side of the underground. Tour operators capitalize on the legend, leading curious crowds to the station and recounting how Anne's life of misery ended in brutal murder, her restless cries said to echo beneath the tracks. What sets this haunting apart is the emotional rawness that witnesses consistently describe. Unlike shadowy figures that inspire fleeting unease or distant whispers that can be dismissed, Anne's presence is overwhelming, visceral, and terrifying. Her screams are said to strike not only the ear but the heart, flooding listeners with dread and sorrow, as though they are briefly made to feel her anguish. Some modern commuters claim that noise-cancelling headphones cannot block out the sudden cries they hear when passing through late at night, while staff quietly admit that certain stairwells and corridors feel wrong no matter the time of year. Paranormal researchers have proposed that the combination of historical trauma and the physical location where her body was once concealed creates an anchor strong enough to fuel the haunting for centuries. Skeptics argue that stories survive because they are retold, gaining momentum with every witness who believes. Yet even they struggle to explain why so many independent accounts aligned so closely. For Londoners, the screaming spectre has become more than just a tale of a ghost. It is a cultural echo of a child lost to cruelty, her agony immortalized in sound and shadow, beneath the rumble of trains and the chatter of daily commuters, and Naylor's cries ensure that the past is never fully buried. Today, the screaming spectre remains one of the underground's most enduring and terrifying legends, shaping the way both locals and visitors perceive Farringdon Station. Despite modern renovations and the constant hum of trains, stories of Anne Naylor's ghost continue to circulate, refusing to fade into mere folklore. Commuters still report sudden drafts of icy air sweeping through sealed areas, or an inexplicable heaviness that seems to cling to them as they wait for their train. Some claim that the cries can be heard even above the roar of approaching carriages, piercing through the mechanical noise with a desperation that chills the blood. Staff, though often reluctant to speak openly, admit privately that they avoid certain stairwells after hours, unwilling to risk encountering what generations before them have warned of. For tourists, the haunting has become part of London's dark allure, drawing ghost hunters and thrill-seekers who hope to experience the phenomenon for themselves. Paranormal groups frequently return, fascinated by the legend's longevity and its refusal to be silenced by time or skepticism. What makes Anne's presence unique is that it is not softened by nostalgia or curiosity but remains raw and harrowing, a direct echo of pain and injustice. Her ghost does not simply walk the corridors, it screams, demanding to be heard, refusing the world the comfort of forgetting. Psychologists argue that this legend survives because it forces society to confront uncomfortable truths. The cruelty inflicted on children in the past and the ways such suffering lingers in memory, whether supernatural or symbolic. Anne's story holds extraordinary power, linking the history of the area to a haunting that is as emotional as it is frightening. For those who believe, the screaming spectre ensures that Farringdon is not just a station but a shrine to a voice cut short too soon. The legend of Farringdon's screaming spectre endures because it is more than a ghost story. It is a reminder of cruelty, injustice, and the weight of forgotten lives that refuse to remain buried. Beneath the constant movement of modern London, the tragic voice of Anne Naylor echoes as though history itself is unwilling to let her suffering be erased. For some, the haunting serves as a grim attraction, a tale to thrill tourists and enliven ghost walks. But for others, particularly the staff who work the station after hours, it is an unsettling reality. They describe how the silence of the tunnels can be shattered without warning by a piercing scream, raw and desperate, forcing even seasoned workers to quicken their pace or abandon their patrols. Paranormal investigators argue that Anne's ghost is intelligent, actively responding to the living, while others insist it is merely a residual haunting, a replay of her final moments etched into the very foundations of the station. Yet whether intelligent or residual, the effect is undeniable, a chilling atmosphere that grows heavier with every retelling. Folklorists see in the screaming spectre a perfect example of how trauma becomes myth, how society uses ghost stories to preserve the memory of injustice. Psychologists add that the legend reflects the collective conscience of a city grappling with its darker history of child labor and abuse. But for those who hear the cries, explanations are irrelevant. The experience is too visceral, too immediate, to be brushed aside. More than 2 centuries after her death, Anne Naylor has become immortal in a way she could never have imagined, her agony woven into the living fabric of London. Every train that rattles through Farringdon carries her story forward. Every echo in the tunnels might be her scream, and every chilling draft reminds passengers that some voices, no matter how small, cannot be silenced.